Have you ever really thought about the stories a body can tell long after a person's gone? For a forensic investigator, the human body is more than just a crime scene. It's a chronicle. It's a detailed record of a life and exactly how it ended. Every single mark, every chemical trace, it all holds a clue. So, let's start reading the evidence.
Right? That's the big question we're digging into today. I mean, from the cause of death itself to the environment it was in, even the interactions it had in its final moments. The body is just packed with a staggering amount of information. The real challenge, and honestly the art of forensics, is just knowing how to read it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the most dramatic signs, decoding the cause of death. Then, we'll zoom in on how things like fire and water leave their own unique signatures on the skin. After that, we'll get into the complex world where biology and the law meet. And finally, we'll hunt for those invisible clues you can only find under a microscope. All right, Section 1, Decoding Cause of Death. This is where we're looking at the big, unmistakable evidence, the stuff that points right to how a life ended. A pretty stark example of this is judicial electrocution. It's a method of capital punishment that's still on the books in some U.S. states, where death is caused by a massive electric current. For an investigator, the signs this leaves behind are incredibly specific. There's no mistaking it.
Now, you might think it's just one single blast of electricity, right? But the process is actually way more methodical. First, there's an initial, super high voltage surge. That's designed to make the person unconscious instantly. Then, that's followed by a second, lower voltage surge that lasts longer, and that's what actually stops the heart. The whole thing is monitored and can even be repeated if needed.
And get this is not some modern invention. The electric chair has a long, pretty controversial history, which in itself is part of the forensic record. The very first execution this way was William Kemmler, way back on August 6, 1890. That event, and every single one since, has been studied to understand exactly what electricity does to the human body.
Okay, here's another dramatic sign investigators look for, especially in fire scenes: the pugilistic attitude. It's often called the boxer stance. You can see why. The arms and legs bend up into what looks like a defensive pose. But this isn't a conscious act. The person isn't fighting. It's a direct result of extreme heat literally cooking the muscle proteins, which makes them shrink and contract. It's an absolute telltale sign of fire.
So now let's narrow our focus a bit. We're moving from the body's overall posture to zoom right in on the skin itself. Think of it like a canvas for heat trauma. It tells a really detailed story that helps investigators tell the difference between fire, water, and other sources of heat.
First up, we've got scalds. Now, the key phrase here is moist heat. We're not talking about a dry flame. This is trauma from something like boiling water or super hot steam. It usually affects the top layers of skin, but the clues it leaves behind are totally different from a dry burn.
And the differences are really stark. A scald makes the skin look kind of soggy and bleached. A dry burn? That leaves it dry and shriveled. With a dry burn, an investigator is going to find singed hair, charring, and maybe the biggest clue of all, soot particles in the airway. That's a clear sign the person was alive and breathing in smoke. With a scald, all of those things are missing.
But maybe the most important question of all is this: did the burning happen before or after death? See, a living body reacts to a burn. It sends blood rushing to the area, which creates this distinct red line. It forms real blisters filled with fluid. But a body that's burned after death, it doesn't have any of that vital reaction. The blisters are false, they're just filled with gas, and there's no red line. And that one distinction can be the difference between a tragic accident and a murder.
Okay, let's shift gears now into a much more complex area. This is where forensic science runs right into some deeply personal and legal issues. This section is all about the signs related to reproduction and how they end up getting interpreted by the law.
A perfect example of this is India's Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, or the MTP Act. It's a law that defines when an abortion is legally allowed. Now, why does a forensic pathologist need to know about this? Well, it's crucial when they're investigating a death that might have been caused by an illegal or unsafe procedure.
So the Act spells out four main justifications. There's therapeutic, which is for the mother's health; eugenic, if there's a high chance of serious fetal abnormalities; social, for cases where birth control failed; and humanitarian for pregnancies that are the result of rape. This legal context can be everything for an investigator in certain cases.
The law also bumps up against forensics in cases of alleged sexual assault, where investigators might be asked to try and determine virginity. The clinical term for this is virgo intacta, and for a long time, the main sign people used for this was the state of the hymen.
Which brings us to a really critical question. Is the hymen a foolproof indicator? Well, modern forensic science has evolved, and the answer to that is a hard no. Absolutely not.
And here's why. It turns out that sexual intercourse is far from the only reason a hymen might be ruptured. The list includes everything from an accidental fall to using sanitary products to medical procedures and even some diseases. An investigator has to consider all these other possibilities to avoid making a terrible and just plain wrong assumption.
All right, for our final section, we're going from the world we can see and diving down to the microscopic level. We're talking about the invisible clues, the ones that take serious lab work to uncover, but can often tell the most powerful story of all.
In sexual assault cases, this is one of the most fundamental pieces of evidence you can find. The presence of semen is a direct indicator that sexual activity took place, and analyzing it can unlock a treasure trove of information.
So how do you prove that a stain is actually what you think it is? Well, investigators use very specific chemical tests. For instance, a fluorescence test reacts to a chemical called choline that's found in semen, making it glow. Another test uses picric acid to look for tiny spermine crystals. These tests make the invisible not just visible, but confirmed.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Once semen is confirmed, the analysis can go even deeper. And that's all thanks to a group of people called secretors. A secretor is just someone whose ABO blood type, A, B, AB, or O, doesn't just show up in their blood. It shows up in their other bodily fluids too.
And that brings us to this number, 80%. A full 80% of the population are secretors. For investigators, especially back before DNA testing was a thing, this was a complete game changer. It meant that in most cases, they could figure out the ABO blood type of a suspect from a semen sample alone. It was a powerful tool that could include or exclude suspects right from the start.
So from the massive scale of electrocution and fire, all the way down to the microscopic traces of our own unique biology, our bodies are constantly recording our story. They're a silent witness, holding the evidence of how we lived and how we died. Which leaves one final lingering question. What story will yours tell?